We're live. Here we go. It's showtime. You guys, I'm with Jackie. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. Is that what that is? It's different in like every state. So yeah, you guys, I am here. My name is Jenna Overbaugh. I'm a therapist here at OCD. Been working with people who have OCD and anxiety for 10 or 12 years. Really, really love it. And I'll be doing the Mondays from this point forward. So I'm going to be bringing on some fun guests so we can get some different perspectives for all of you. So yeah, if you have any questions, whether you're from YouTube or Facebook, make sure that you submit those questions and Jackie and I will try to answer them. So yeah, we won't be able to get to everything, but we sure as heck will try to do our best. So yeah, Jackie, why don't you introduce yourself for us a little bit? Thank you so much for coming on here.
Thanks for having me. My name is Jackie Chapin. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Los Angeles. And I specialize in treating clients with OCD and other anxiety disorders, as well as eating disorders. So that's kind of my wheelhouse.
Awesome. Yes. And I know we've talked before. I know that you're into the treatment of eating disorders. And so I think that's going to be a unique little perspective that we can get from you today. So you guys, if you have any specific questions about, orthorexia or eating disorders and kind of how that shows up, or any questions related to that, I think Jackie would be a good person to kind of get a perspective from. So way this works, we'll just kind of answer questions, kind of give a good chat back and forth about it. So Jackie, if you see any question that you like or that you really want to go after, just let me know and I'll pull it up.
Cool.
All right. I'm doing this one only because I saw my name and I saw my name and like my brain went right to it.
Jenna, yeah.
And so I like have a soft spot in my heart for mamas.
Yeah, that's neat. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, we don't have to talk about the beginning part, but I'm scared about potentially being pregnant and getting ready to start ERP therapy. I know that's probably my OCD talking. So yes, OCD loves to just annihilate and destroy any chance of you guys getting better. So OCD is going to make you really scared to start that process. And I think ERP just kind of sounds kind of scary, like exposure therapy. But, there's so much good to it. So, my advice with that in general is just recognize that OCD can attack treatment. It can attack your approach to treatment. It can make you doubt that too. It can make you doubt whether you have OCD. It can make you doubt your therapist. It can have you doubt the whole entire process. So there's nothing to say that you cannot start ERP therapy while you're pregnant or while you're trying to get pregnant or when you've just had a baby. If anything, I think having a therapist and being in a supportive environment, if you are anxious or you're having those symptoms, it's a great time to secure someone like that because, being pregnant, those big life transitions are accompanied by a lot of just obvious life adjustments, not to mention hormonal shifts that can really kind of knock everything out of whack. So if anything, logic would tell me that those are the best times to make sure that you're kind of secured with a therapist versus what OCD is telling you, I might be pregnant, so I'm scared of starting therapy. Jackie, what are your thoughts about that?
No, I agree with everything you said. I think there's nothing dangerous about doing exposure response prevention, especially being pregnant. I think I validate that, yes, it can bring up a lot of anxiety and fear, but that's also part of ERP. And I think that if it does happen that you're having, obsessions or compulsions before, during, after the pregnancy, I think it's really great to get help and be open about the fear, but also kind of be ready to have support while you face it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing that I always tell my moms or, I want to say parents too, because it can obviously happen to any kind of caregiver. But, a lot of times people I think struggle like, oh yeah, I don't need therapy because I'm just pregnant right now. Once I'm pregnant and the baby's here, I'll be fine. It's like, no, you won't. The OCD and the anxiety will find some other way to kind of latch onto something. So this is, again, just more of an opportunity, more kind of evidence that this would be a good opportunity to get started so that you are working with someone who you feel like can support you and do the evidence-based treatment. So go for it. Go for it.
I agree. And it's nice that you're asking this question now because you're already kind of insightful to know that even if you don't have your OCD isn't talking right now about your pregnancy, why not get support anyways during this time?
Absolutely. And finding anyone who is trained in exposure and response prevention and the treatment of OCD and related disorders, maybe even finding someone who specializes in postpartum. So finding like that, the best of both worlds type of situation there would be really helpful. Postpartum Support International is really great. And also the International OCD Foundation could be a great resource. So best of luck to you. Jackie, I know you had you wanted to go over this one.
Yes. So should I read it?
Sure, go for it.
So Danny says, are delusions common with OCD? I've been experiencing really strong ideas that I've swallowed something dangerous and I need an x-ray. Does this fit in with my OCD? So I kind of have two answers. Part is I don't really want to answer in case that's giving you reassurance. But what I will say is I don't know if this is necessarily a delusion or not, because it is common for people that struggle with OCD to have obsessions that can't or maybe isn't possible that they still have. For instance, some people, I have some teens that kind of random, but I have some teens that have never been sexually active and they have OCD thoughts that they're pregnant. And that's a pretty common one. So for this one, it could be something like that. And I believe it's okay to rule out one time. Like if you're worried that you actually did swallow something and you want to get an x-ray, I think a rule is like rule it out one time. And if you get that answer that nothing's wrong, doing anything after that to check would be a compulsion. I also remember watching an awesome OCD talk at IOCDF, I think it was last year. And they talked about how there's no diagnosis that is titled OCD with delusions. It doesn't exist. So there's actually, sadly, people are wrongly diagnosed with schizophrenia when it's really just OCD with delusions because there's just no medical diagnosis. So that is also common as well when you start believing things that someone else might view as just, impossible or don't really make quite much sense, which OCD does to us.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a two-parter.
Yeah. And I agree. Like my first thought is that we're always stuck in this weird scenario. Like I want to provide the education, but I don't know. So take it or leave it as far as the reassurance goes. But with that said, I think of this as really no different from any other intrusive fear. What comes to mind is like real event OCD or, the hit and run OCD where you feel like that bump, like, could I have hit someone? Did I actually hit someone? I've worked, especially in residential at Rogers Memorial Hospital. I've worked with people at the residential level of care who are super debilitated by their obsessive compulsive symptoms, and they would have such low insight. They would have such low insight, maybe even absent insight, which is where I think is what we're getting to here. Like it's an issue, I think, of insight. So insight is this level to which you guys can kind of evaluate your fears and realize like, okay, that feels really real, but I know that it's not. And when you have really, really good insight, you see both of those sides very clearly, which can be really maddening, right? So I think a lot of you could resonate with the concept that OCD is maddening in that way, that it feels so real on one side of the spectrum. And then on the other side, that it's just absolutely ridiculous, but it seems so real. So that's what we call good insight. Like, yes, I know that I cannot get pregnant because I've not been sexually active, but it still feels like what if? So that's what we talk about when we're talking about good insight. Now, not everyone has good insight. There's such a thing as like fair insight, where you're a little bit more convinced that these things are real, a little bit, less convinced that they're illogical, but you're still kind of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Now, when we get to poor insight, that's where you're actually kind of more convinced that this is real, but there's a little bit kind of like, well, what if it's not? And so it can kind of bounce that way.
Delusional, right? Like I had a client that had little insight, and so it was really hard for them to hear that what they were saying was either irrational or couldn't possibly be true.
100%. Yep. They're almost like convinced. They're convinced. And then there's absent insight, which is, where I think it gets tricky sometimes. OCD with absent insight, and then, a psychotic disorder or schizophrenia or delusions. It can get kind of tricky. But yeah, I would think of it as far as the level of insight here would be something of importance. And so just asking yourself, like, where do I feel like I fit on that spectrum? And so does it fit with my OCD? It seems like it based on the small amount of information that we've been given. Again, I would say that this is not really all that different as far as what other people struggle with. Like Jackie was saying, the fear that I might be pregnant, even though I know that it's impossible for me to get pregnant without being sexually active. People feel that way all the time, or at least have fears of that. People have fears all the time that, oh my gosh, like I feel like I have a headache. So, oh my gosh, could I have something in my brain? Could I have a brain tumor? So yeah, I don't necessarily think of this as any different content wise. Again, like I'm a fan of the idea that content doesn't really matter. It's more about the doubt. And wanting to be 100% sure. I just want to be 100% sure that I didn't swallow anything. So I'm with Jackie. Depending on if you've already checked into this before, depending on your level of insight, try not to check. Like if you can seriously try to do that, that would be the best way. If not, try to reduce checking, try to set very, very clear limits and very clear boundaries on that. And just be aware this could go the opposite direction, right? So you could go to the doctor, you could get that x-ray, and it could feel good for a couple minutes. It might feel good for a couple days or a couple weeks, a couple years. It wouldn't be unheard of for that to then come back, maybe as that same thought, but maybe also something different. So maybe then that comes as something different, like I have a weird pain in my leg. Does that mean I'm having a blood clot or something? So just be on the lookout. Just know that at the end of the day, this is the doubt disorder. This is all about becoming 100% sure. And you have a brain that is wanting to be 100% sure. In this scenario, you're wanting to be 100% sure that you didn't swallow something, but it could be anything. It could be anything.
Yeah.
So just be on the lookout for that. But also validating, obviously, how incredibly scary that is. Like sensory motor stuff and body stuff, like I have a soft spot for those individuals because it's got to feel scary, right? Like your body has one job, which is to keep you alive. And we're basically asking you to not act on those impulses to keep yourself safe. So I get it. Let's see. This is so fun. This is, well, not fun. Obviously, it's a big struggle, but I am going to validate that this is like such a common experience in the OCD trajectory. OCD is very predictable. Daily art grind. I've been trying to help a friend of mine with sexual orientation OCD. Could also be significant other OCD, but again, it doesn't really matter. She says her thoughts don't cause anxiety anymore, and this is causing her anxiety. What should she do? Also, is this a sign of improvement? Jackie, what do you think?
I forget the name of it, but isn't there an obsession? Yes, and obsessing about obsessing. Why
meta OCD?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it sounds like because the thoughts don't cause anxiety anymore, this is causing anxiety. So it's almost like even not even OCD, someone suffering high anxiety, there's this unknown. Like, what is it like when I don't have anxiety? And there's a difficulty in just enjoying not feeling anxiety. And so it sounds like there's a little bit of that going on. Why don't I feel what I'm used to feeling so often?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, I see that so often. So a couple things. This could be a sign of improvement. It certainly could be. It could also be a sign that the OCD maybe is just not getting what it wants in this area, so it's trying to get it in some other area. I think of this as like when my son asks me for an ice cream cone before dinner and I say no, he just goes to dad, right? And sometimes dad says no, sometimes he gives in and says yes. So this is kind of what our OCD and anxiety will do too. When you're not giving the OCD what it wants in one area, meaning like the sexual orientation OCD, if you're not careful, it can just try to get it from some other source, which may be, okay, now I'm going to make your friend really anxious about her anxiety. Now I'm going to make her really anxious about her treatment and see if that's how she gets to give in to me. Because again, at the end of the day, this is all about doubt. It's all about that generic sense of uncertainty. Like Jackie was saying, what's waiting behind door number 2 if I'm not anxious? Like, what's there? Like, am I doing something wrong? Like, what's waiting for me?
It does sound like it could be a sign of improvement because it's jumping to something else. Because sometimes when you work on exposure for one kind of OCD theme or doubt, and you like got it, then the OCD jumps to something else. And the same thing she maybe did for the sexual orientation OCD would be the same. Like, maybe it is causing me anxiety. Maybe it's not. I'm not going to try to figure it out.
Yep. That's the beautiful thing about exposure therapy is that regardless of how these intrusive thoughts come up or these fears or these worries, you apply the principles the exact same way. So all of the things that your friend was doing or that any of you are doing with one, subtype, or one struggle, sexual orientation OCD, harm OCD, hit and run, whatever it might be, if it kind of plays that whack-a-mole game on you at any point, including, but not limited to, when it also attacks your progress in treatment, like, oh my gosh, I'm not anxious anymore, what do I do? You just apply exposure therapy principles to that new scenario. So this is also, I think, more commonly referred to as the backdoor spike. So like, I'm not anxious anymore. What does that mean about me? I hear this a lot with people who have sexual intrusive thoughts around children or like loved ones, and harm intrusive thoughts. Like, okay, so they habituate to their exposures, or they learn through inhibitory learning about these different ideas. So they learn that they don't need to avoid kids and they still haven't acted out or whatever. So let's say they're doing these exposures around kids. They're hanging out at like the swimming pool around kids, and suddenly they're not anxious anymore. OCD might swoop in and be like, well, that's really weird that you're not anxious around these kids anymore. What does that mean about you that you're not anxious about these thoughts anymore? That's the backdoor spike. So what does this mean about you that you're not anxious about this anymore? You need to just be like, whoop, I'm treating that like an obsession. Apply the same ERP principles as you would and just keep up with your normally scheduled programming. Awesome. Dun, dun, dun. Let's do this one. I'll let you read.
Oh, okay. Chloe says, been doing well, but began engaging my OCD thoughts in a dream, then woke up a bit anxious. Is this common?
I have thoughts. So I think of this as an intrusive thought, right? Like, you can't help what happens in your dreams. Just the same way that when you're moseying down the street or you're hanging out with your family or you're watching a movie, you can't help that intrusive thought. You can't help what happens in your dreams. You can't help thoughts that happen to you. You can't help thoughts that pop into your head, but you can help thoughts that you conjure up. Okay? That's like one of my favorite go-to things. You can't help thoughts that pop up, but you can help thoughts that you conjure up. And so I would think of this as no different as an intrusive thought. It can, of course, be scary. It's saying boo in the middle of the night. And so it's okay to have that scared reaction. That's typical, especially when it's kind of unexpected. You're on the defense. It's hard to be on the defense when you're sleeping. But I would wake up, feel that anxiety, and your responsibility, your only job is to not try to make that feel better. So not trying to analyze it, not trying to compulse through it, try to remember what it was, ask reassurance for it, Google it, whatever it would be. Just resist your rituals with that. Anything else, Jackie?
I feel for this person, it sounds like when they say they're doing well, like they've been probably either not having a lot of intrusive thoughts or ERP's been working for them. And so it's sad to hear like, great, now it's happening in my sleep. I think even going further than trying to accept it is even like welcoming it.
Yeah.
As horrible as this may sound, But like before you go to bed, being like, all right, let's go have some dreams about, some intrusive thoughts, and kind of make the OCD monster a little bit like annoyed that you're not scared,
Mm-hmm.
by doing that.
I love that. I just got the chills. I love that because I think that it's hard. Like by doing that, you're on offense.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not on the defense. Like you're going into it. It's hard to be tiptoeing when you're on the offense like that. Mm-hmm. And so not just before you sleep, but anytime, right? Like, especially in this example, obviously before you go to bed, like give me 2 servings and give it to me now. You're going to give me some bad dreams. Bring it.
Yeah.
I hope I have some bad dreams tonight. Bring it on because I got this. But you could do that in any situation. So before you go to work, before you hang out with your toddler, before you do exposures, like, you know what, bring it. I'm here for it. It's hard to kind of tiptoe and, have that like scared mentality when you're welcoming it in, when you're on the offense. And it's okay to not feel that brave at first. It's okay if that like doesn't feel genuine at first. It will eventually. I think if you just have that courage to start and you kind of just like fake it till you make it, you'll eventually catch up.
I agree.
I love that. That's a really good practical piece of advice. Oh, hi. I'm seeing so many people in here that I know. Hi, Nate. This is really cool.
I can comment on the medication one really quickly.
Yeah, which one is it? Who did it? I'll find it.
Josh Michael. Our medication recommendations for OCD based on the severity of the disorder on the individual. There seems to be a lot of conflicting opinions on meds for OCD. It's right. It's 2 down from Chloe.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different beliefs around medication, and I, for one, am very open to medication. It doesn't necessarily, I don't even think it's necessarily based on the severity. Obviously, the more severe, the more I personally think medication could be helpful. Or if someone has tried doing ERP and it just doesn't, it seems really hard to do the homework. I've noticed that people will see a psychiatrist and try medication. And sometimes I notice that medication just helps make doing homework easier. So I don't know if you've noticed that, Jenna, but I've seen people where like they're not on it and they're having a really hard time doing the homework, and then they go on medication and all of a sudden they're like doing it. And that little stubborn part of the OCD that is just making it that much harder kind of backs off a little bit. But I there's probably conflicting opinions depending on maybe the therapist's beliefs about medication or your own beliefs. But I have seen that it can really just make the process that it's like someone holding your hand is what I've heard. It can be like someone holding your hand through the process.
The best analogy that I usually go to for medications is that medications won't run the race for you, but they help you get to the starting line. So I definitely don't think that everyone needs medication. It totally depends on your own unique situation and your severity. It depends on just like obviously your willingness and kind of a ton of other factors. You don't need medication. Some people really, 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 really benefit from it. I've seen people who have tried every which way. They've followed all the feedback. You can tell that they're motivated and they're willing, but it seems like they just can't really pick up the ball that I'm throwing to them. And those are the individuals after like all is said and done that we may recommend like trying an additional type of medication or trying to get a psychiatrist involved. And so, so I've seen, totally a huge change in people, like being able to suddenly get it when like they weren't able to kind of get it before. A lot of people have said before that it all felt kind of fuzzy before, like it all just felt fuzzy. I couldn't really like put it all together, but once they were able to take that medication, they were able to kind of connect the dots. Working with a psychiatrist who is well versed in OCD and anxiety disorders would be really helpful. And those are things that we as therapists can definitely help. We can, with your permission, obviously communicate with them. We can, just help facilitate some of that communication. Let's do this one. IVF from Kristen. IVF triggered my OCD big time. Now I feel like I'm never going to get better and scared to go forward with the embryo transfer. So first of all, this is just a really emotional process. I've never had to go through it, but I've been there for many friends who have had to go through it and family members. And I can imagine, all the appointments, all the, roller coasters of emotions. It just has to be really, really difficult. And so, of course, OCD, being the advantageous jerk that it is going to swoop in and try to take advantage of that situation. So without knowing too much more about your specific intrusive thoughts or your worries or your uncertainties, it's hard to kind of say much. But, I would ask yourself, if anxiety wasn't part of the equation here, what would you do? Like sometimes our anxiety, is protective in a way, and it tells us to slow down when we need to slow down, and it keeps us from doing things that we would otherwise maybe not do that aren't such a great idea. But when you get confused or you're lost as far as, which way to go, I would challenge you to ask yourself, what would I do if my OCD wasn't part of the picture? And really try to just identify your values. This is, I think, a really good piece where like ACT could come in, like where are your values? Do you need to maybe just take some time and kind of process it all and, get to a good spot mentally before you make that next move? Or do you feel like, yeah, I really want to make that next move, but my OCD is not letting me right now? What would you do if anxiety and OCD weren't part of the equation? Jackie, did you have anything else to add?
I love that. I think that's so important for so many people with OCD is it can really go against your values, which is why I think that's an amazing tool to ask yourself, what would I do if this wasn't happening? If I didn't have these intrusive thoughts and facing fear.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully having like a strong supportive network around you, supportive partner, those things can all be helpful. Yeah, definitely. It's a challenging time for people. This is a good one. Maybe some good practical tips we can give. How can I identify whether doing something is an OCD compulsion or a necessary safety behavior? What do you think?
How can I identify whether it's an OCD compulsion or a safety behavior? A lot of times, I think one is what is bringing up this compulsion. So is there an obsessive thought? What is the obsessive thought and what is the purpose of the compulsion? Is it to lower your anxiety or is it actually to protect yourself from something that's real? I think if it sounds like there's a little bit of reassurance seeking coming up. So I think, can you sit with not knowing if it's a safety behavior or not? Mm-hmm.
And I think this is I get this question all the time. Like, well, don't normal people do that? Whatever normal means. Yeah. I get a lot of times, like I'll ask people to do an exposure or encourage a certain type of ritual prevention. And they'll make a comment like, well, my mom does that all the time. Like, what's the deal? And so, and I get that. Like, I can see how that would be kind of confusing for people who have OCD. And definitely this is a like sneaky little trap that the OCD can fall into. I would always encourage you to ask yourself, what's good for my treatment? Like knowing what I know about exposure and response prevention, what's good for my treatment? Because sometimes in treatment, you're going to have to do things that may be normal, whatever that means anyways, that maybe other people don't do. And so, again, when I used to work at Rogers, it was a long time ago, like years and years ago, and now saying this during COVID times seems like ridiculous. But we used to get to the point with some individuals where before they stepped down from residential to partial, they had to like meet the milestone. Some of them, not all of them. They had to meet the milestone of being able to urinate without washing their hands after. Now, that's not something that everyone had to do. If that was, identified within their own personal treatment plan, and that was agreed upon with the resident and with the therapist, and everyone agreed, that would be something that was kind of like a milestone in their treatment. Now, I think we could all agree that that's if we were to pull everybody in the world, United States or whatever, they would say that, yes, I wash my hands after I go to the bathroom. Now, I don't know if that's true. People would probably lie for the most part and say yes, even though they maybe don't. But that's an example of where, for the sake of treatment, we may have to push you a little bit beyond normal for the sake of you doing what's good for your treatment. And now the goal isn't to never wash your hands ever again in that situation. The goal isn't to say that that person always has to pee and never wash their hands again. The goal with that is look at what you were able to do, and now think of all the other awesome things that you're going to be able to do that kind of is under that umbrella because you did that, right? Like, think about all the generalizing qualities that does. And so all of that is to say, sometimes in treatment, you have to do things that maybe go a little bit beyond normal. Now, I don't think that you need to like stick your hands in a toilet and eat and like lick a toilet seat. I don't think you need to like go all the way down there. And I don't know where, I don't know where like one ends and one begins. I don't think any of us have like a perfect roadmap for all of that. But you will have to be willing, potentially, when you're ready for it and when treatment calls for it, to maybe push the envelope a little bit. So ask yourself, instead of asking yourself and getting caught in that trap of like, well, what's normal? What do other people do? Ask yourself, what's good for my treatment?
Yeah, that's great. When you say what's normal, that's another compulsion.
Yeah, and you'll never know what's necessary, right? Like, you'll never know what's normal. I grew up in a family where we never washed our hands, ever. And I hear like someone else's family normal would be completely different from that. So it's all relative. It's always going to change. It's never going to be certain. And it's just an awful target to try to hit anyway. We'll never know what's normal. So, but you will know for the most part, especially with a therapist helping you through that process, you should be able to figure out, at least for the most part, what's good for your treatment. Cool. Let's talk about some mental compulsions.
I'm a large emotional checker. I'm checking for feelings of depression, heaviness all the time. How to stop the emotional checking, ruminating. There's a couple of questions like this. Like, someone else asked, how can I stop my OCD from making me lose control of my mouth? Why is it so hard to do something? Obviously, the overall answer, because I don't know everyone's experience here, is to do exposure response prevention with a therapist. Is like the broad answer. But I think for emotional checker, it's, can you sit with the unknown of why you're having emotions and not needing to find an answer? A lot of times, compulsions and obsessions, they can feel so urgent. And that's kind of another sign when it's OCD versus not OCD, is this amount of urgency around it.
Yeah.
So you don't want to stop checking your feelings. But when you notice that you're ruminating, be aware of it first. Name it. Like, oh, I'm doing that thing again where I'm ruminating. Or, oh, I noticed that I'm checking my feelings. That awareness can first start you from stopping the compulsion of checking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think of ruminating as, well, and the same with kind of emotional checking. I think of these are all in the effort of trying to answer something. They're trying to get closer to certainty. You're trying to answer something. You're trying to get clarity about something. You're trying to answer something. And obsessions are often going to come in the form of a question. Your job is to not answer that question. And so, especially when it comes to ruminations, I would encourage you to identify, like, what's the question that I'm trying to answer? Like, am I depressed enough? Maybe, I don't know. But that's something that I cannot figure out. Am I feeling heavy today? I don't know. I don't know how I'm feeling today. I don't know how I'm going to be feeling in 5 minutes. I don't know how I'm going to be feeling later. And I'm not going to figure it out. And I'm not going to give it any more attention. And I'm going to continue to do whatever it was that I was going to do today, regardless of that feeling. Right? So I think a lot of times when it comes to like emotional checkers or people who engage in this type of behavior, they tend to feel like I can't do X until Y, like I can't do Y until X is satisfied. And that's not true. Like, you need to show OCD that you can go and hang out with your friends, that you can go and cook dinner, that you can go to that job interview, that you can do whatever, regardless of how you feel. That's one of the best non-engagement strategies is, to not engage with your OCD. The best thing that you can do is to be okay with all of your emotions and continue to do what you wanted to do anyway. So yeah. So I would, with this and with any other type of ruminating, I would encourage you to ask yourself, like, what question am I trying to answer? Like, in what form is this obsession coming? What's the question that I'm trying to answer here? And how do my only job is to not answer that question. My only job is to not answer that question, whatever that means.
And going back to what you said that I loved was, what would I do if I didn't have this feeling? What would I do if I wasn't checking for a feeling? Would I go out with my friends? Would I want to do this and that? And kind of go with that to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Here's a good one.
My mom makes with my
maybe messes with.
Thank you. My mom messes with contamination OCD, turning the tap off, hiding soap. This only makes things worse. Wash hands longer, or my hands are so gross and I can't touch anything. How to deal with this? Okay, so it sounds like your mom is trying to help in their own way, but it sounds like you're noticing it's not really helpful, like they're trying to get involved. I'm curious what you have to say, because I'm not sure if it's that your mom is trying to control the OCD or if they're enabling. What do you think?
So I mean,
she tries to stop the compulsion, maybe.
Yeah, I think mom is trying to come in and like interrupt or like deter / like prevent her from being able to do her compulsions.
Oh, so your mom is actually probably doing what's best for you. Enabling would be she lets you just wash your hands forever. Whereas it sounds like she's trying to help put a limit on it, and it makes you feel more gross, which just means that you're getting more distress when you're trying to sit with not being able to wash your hands or do whatever your compulsion is. So as much as you might get, upset with your mom, I think it sounds like what she's doing is trying to help you reduce your compulsions,
mm-hmm.
and to try to allow her to do this and not go off on her if that happens.
Well, I can see how without that family education that this just seems like the intention is good, the approach maybe is not well timed or well thought out. And so without that kind of education about why, I can see why this would be really infuriating, right? Like your OCD, like your anxiety is like, go, go, go. I want to just do it and move on with my day. I just want to wash my hands and get over it. Like you're actually making it worse. And although the intention is good, like Jackie is saying, your mom is trying to, curb your rituals, trying to do X, Y, and Z. She's trying to hide things. It actually, those choices need to come from you. And so I think it's good to not enable. I think it's good for your mom to not accommodate. So it would be good for your mom to do things like not buy you special soap. It's reasonable to expect your mom not to wait for you for if you're going to go out to dinner. It's reasonable for your mom not to wait for you if you get stuck washing your hands or showering. So those are things like accommodations, right? Like waiting for the OCD. What you're saying is that mom is like interjecting more deliberately, and that I feel like could backfire without your consent. And so these choices have to come from you, and hopefully you can get in with a therapist who's able to kind of give that education to you about why your mom is trying to do why she's doing what she's doing, but maybe a better delivery for that. And so, yeah, we at No CD, and I'm sure other therapists as well, would be able to definitely get your mom involved, kind of make it a whole OCD family therapeutic process, because as witnessed here, OCD affects, and it can affect the whole family. People who have OCD, their family members are often just kind of like at their wits' end, whether they are accommodating or whether they're like doing what this mom is doing, which is kind of deliberately interjecting. And it all can just be a mess. So I would say that your mom her intentions probably are in the right place, but the delivery might be a little bit off. And while those things should be good for you, it would also be even better if you were the one making those decisions. If you were the one making the decision to turn the tap off, if you were the one using the different soap or whatever. So my best advice is to IOCDF.org has a lot of family resources. Maybe you and your mom can have a discussion about some of those things, just maybe about some different ways to go about, like basically we would want your mom to learn how to support you without accommodating you. And there are ways to do that. So that's my recommendation. There's also a really great podcast. I need to find it. So maybe we'll move on. Jackie, did you have anything else? I'll come back and I have a good podcast that I'll share.
This comes up a lot with eating disorder treatment as well. And with eating disorder treatment, you never want to interrupt someone when they're in a behavior because it just doesn't help, which is what I hear you also saying. So it sounds like maybe you and your mom haven't gotten on the same page. And so I 100% agree, if you are in therapy for OCD, that there be a session where maybe your mom comes in and you do a psychoed together, where you decide together what's going to be best for you, versus, your mom making stuff up and it not being something that you decided beforehand.
Right. Is that what you would do, Jackie, with eating disorders? You would encourage them to come together and like have a discussion about like agreements and compromises and stuff?
Yeah, because you said like the exact same phrase I've used, which is eating disorders aren't just harming the client. It permeates through the whole family, and so it's just never good to interject when someone's having a behavior. It's almost like that's too late. It's if someone's already doing it, it just makes it worse to interject. So It's about talking about what it can look like in the future if you're going to ask the mom to, help in any way. But it has to be the client's decision if they're wanting that family member to help or not.
Mm-hmm. And again, like I think this is different from accommodating. So I see accommodating as like mom buying you special soap. We don't want mom to do that. But to deliberately interject and hide it, like Jackie is saying, like you need to make the decision to not do that.
Because I like how you said that it might make things worse. Like you might try to then go wash your hands in secret so that your mom doesn't interject, versus both of you being on the same page with what it's going to look like for you.
Or like, fine, like my hands aren't clean now. Now I'm just not going to eat because you won't let me wash my hands. And then it's just avoidance, right? So this is where therapists can be so helpful, because we can help, bring education and a solid plan and feedback and get parents on board and all that stuff. The podcast is from the OCD stories. It's John Hirschfield, when a family member has OCD. So John Hirschfield is amazing. He's a psychotherapist based in Maryland. He's written a couple books about OCD. He's really well known in the field. So I forget what number that is. But if you just Google the OCD Stories podcast, it's John Hirschfield, when a family member has OCD. That might be really helpful to share with your mom or anyone else out there who's struggling, and just would help maybe give your family member a little bit more insight into kind of what's going on. All right. This one would be interesting to hear your feedback on, because you probably deal with it all the time with eating disorders. Emily, how do you deal with the physical symptoms of anxiety, such as restlessness and other things?
It's interesting because I kind of have more from what I've learned with OCD, what's really helpful is to sit with the symptoms of anxiety. I think it was John Hirschfield or someone else that says something like anxiety is just emotion, like physical sensations in your body. And sometimes naming them actually helps you be with them and just they eventually pass. So it's really good to do a check-in with your body and name, okay, where do I feel the physical symptoms? What do they actually feel like? Describing them. But it's really helpful to remind yourself, you don't need to deal with it. You don't need to do anything when you have physical symptoms of anxiety, other than accepting that it's there and maybe noticing like, okay, I feel a lot of anxiety in my body. It feels like my shoulders are tight or my hands are sweaty. When it comes to eating disorder treatment, sometimes it can get a little bit tricky, because with ED treatment, we talk a lot about coping skills. And so a lot of times some people have a hard time sitting with the physical symptoms of anxiety. And so then they use behaviors. that are harming their health. And so for that, they use different tools like distraction, or they journal, or, they do different things to help with anxiety. But what I've learned with ERP for OCD is you don't really need coping skills, because you're showing yourself that you can sit with the fear and the discomfort.
Yes. So, yes. So
I'm curious how you do it, because for like one disorder, in treatment, you do a lot of coping skills. Whereas with OCD, I remember learning like, you don't need to tell them to cope, because they don't need to cope, because they're not going to come up.
We don't do any coping. Now, that's not to say that, and I promise I'll get back to the question, because I have like so many exciting things to say, and I need to remember to say them all. Yeah, we don't do any coping. The reason for that is, I think of it like when you're around a toddler and they fall, right? So you're around a toddler and they fall, they kind of look at you. They have this moment where they look at you and they're like, what are you supposed to do, right? Like you're supposed to not react. And the reason you're not supposed to react is because you just kind of add to the drama. Like you've just given them evidence that this is in fact scary. It must be scary because my mom's freaking out, so I guess I'm going to freak out too. Whereas if you just kind of have this neutral stance, it's like you let them decide. And for the most part, they don't react at all. They just kind of pick up and they keep moving. And so it works the same way with your anxiety. I always say, like, every time that you have an intrusive thought, your brain kind of is like that toddler that fell. It's kind of looking at you like, okay, Jackie, what are you going to do? Okay, Emily, what are you going to do? And if you react dramatically, like that parent, like, oh my gosh, are you okay? Are you okay? Your toddler's going to start to freak out because you've just given the message that this is scary, that this does require some type of emotional reaction. That's what you tell your brain every time you do a compulsion or every time you cope. By coping, instead of just allowing the anxiety to be there, you basically reinforce that this is scary. I can't just sit with it. I can't just let it pass. It does require some type of response from me. So that's not to say, though, that you can't meditate, that you can't exercise, that you can't do deep breathing, that you can't listen to music. I do all of those things. I just don't do those things in the context of reducing my anxiety that I feel in the face of an obsession. That's different. So to meditate, I meditated earlier today. I didn't meditate because of an intrusive thought that I had that I felt like I couldn't cope with. I meditated because I had like 10 minutes and I know I always feel so much freaking better after I just like chill for 10 minutes, right? So totally different. But to get back to the physical, I don't know, did I answer your question?
Yeah. I think just pointing out that it is a little bit different. Like I sometimes conceptualize compulsions as a way of coping, right? Like reduce the anxiety. And so that's that. Yeah. So that's how you're coping, and you're trying to learn how to not have to cope. And again, I think with eating disorders, it's amazing if you also realize you don't have to cope to handle these emotions. However, if that isn't happening, either going to treatment or realizing, okay, I'm going to switch this unhealthy coping skill with a healthy one. And that's why I think they're just different. Yeah.
And for the physical symptoms, so I don't know, Jackie, if you've ever done interoceptives, but we would encourage people to do interoceptives too. If it was effective and all said and done, it seemed like it would be fitting for their treatment. So sometimes people with anxiety and OCD have high anxiety sensitivity, which means they're just really sensitive to the physiological sensations that accompany anxiety. So they're really sensitive and kind of overly alert and anxious by physiological sensations like increase in their heartbeat, shortness of breath, rapid breath, dizziness. We lost Jackie. I don't know what the heck happened, but I can roll with it. I'm still alive, so I'm still here. She's coming back. What the heck happened? I was rolling with it. It was fine. You're back.
Yeah, I think I was trying to look at the comments and I made a swipe or something.
That's okay. You're back. I was like, her laptop definitely died or something. Yeah, so high anxiety sensitivity is where you just get really physiologically, you're sensitive and kind of overly reactive to these very normal sensations like heartbeat, racing, shortness of breath, dizziness. And these are things that we experience all throughout the day, that we all experience, whether you have OCD and anxiety or not. When you're working out, when you're shorter, walking up the stairs, when you get sick, you feel these things. And so it's not those sensations that are the problem, it's your interpretation of those symptoms that are the problem. And so when you have high anxiety sensitivity, which is very common in OCD and anxiety, you tend to misinterpret those sensations as being dangerous. I can't cope with them. They're not just uncomfortable, but completely intolerable. Oh my gosh, I'm going to feel this way forever. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with my body? Da 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 da. And so what happens with all those thoughts, but more physiological sensations of anxiety because you're panicking now. So you have more physiological sensations of anxiety. You get more anxious about that. You have more physiological sensations of anxiety, and you can work yourself up into a panic attack where, again, this dizziness or this tension was never the issue. It was your interpretation of that and your compulsiveness through that. And so interoceptives are just like body exposures. They work the same way as other exposures. They work to help you habituate to those uncomfortable sensations. They work to help you learn that those sensations are uncomfortable, but they're not necessarily dangerous and that you can cope with them. And so interoceptives could be, running in place. Interoceptives could be holding your breath. Whatever would make, how do you deal with physical symptoms of anxiety? If that restlessness feeling is really anxious for you, do something that's going to make you feel really restless. Try to sit for 5 minutes and just let yourself feel restless, and just do those body exposures. So if you look up interoceptive exercises, you will find a ton. Again, they're going to be things like, sometimes even drinking coffee can be an interoceptive, right? It makes you all jittery, and then you kind of have to sit with that sensation. But just like any other exposure, you will habituate to that. You'll get used to it. And you'll also learn that you can tolerate it so that, outside of those exposures, when you experience those things, whether you're working out, just sick, just randomly kind of experiencing that throughout the day, your brain doesn't alert as much. You're not as sensitive and you're not as overly reactive to it.
Yeah, it's almost similar to what I had said about beating the OCD. You know what? Instead of waiting for the OCD to give me anxiety, I'm going to give myself anxiety. So if you're worried about having a panic attack, I've had clients where they're worried about not being able to breathe, and so we'll do really quick rapid breathing so that they get the sensation of not being able to breathe well, which is just another example of what you were talking about. Mm-hmm. So that's really cool. And remember, the difference between someone with OCD and not is not the intrusive thoughts. It's the response to the thought. So just like you were saying about,
there you go.
Said something similar. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. If that's if I could have 10 bullet points, need to know about OCD, that would be one of them. That it's not your intrusive thoughts that are the problem. It's your interpretation of the thoughts. And same thing with the health stuff, right? Same thing with the physical symptoms. It's not the physical symptoms that are the problem. And that's why so many people, they come to treatment and they misalign their goals with I just want to get rid of my thoughts. And it's but no, we can't do that because intrusive thoughts are normal.
Yeah. You're just going to change your reaction to the thoughts over time.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have time for one more. You pick.
Ooh, okay. So when I disappeared, it got rid of a bunch of them. So a couple of the ones that I can see, one says, throughout the day, I feel the things I'm doing are keeping me safe and healthy. But since these things are taking up almost my whole day, I think some of them may be OCD. How do I know which ones to stop? Cool. We kind of answered this earlier, I think, but first of all, not trying to figure out the answer of which ones to stop, but trying to sit with not doing things that keep you safe and healthy. I would need a little bit more background on specifics, but if it's taking up most of your day, then it's probably your OCD. And can you start to set goals to shorten the time that you're taking to do these different safety measures?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it can feel overwhelming not knowing where to start. Like, like what I see here, I hear two sides. I hear one side of it, which is like, this is taking up my entire day. And like, I'm completely overwhelmed by these symptoms. Like, what am I going to do? And then in another situation, I hear like, I don't really want to get rid of any of them because I feel like they're all necessary, right? So what an awful like spot to be in. And I think that a lot of people who have OCD would say that OCD has put them in those situations, right? Like, I want to get rid of everything because it's driving me crazy, but I also don't want to get rid of anything because I feel like I need to do them. The feeling that you need to do them does not mean that you need to do them.
Right.
And so I just want you to know that just because you feel like these things keep you safe and healthy, like just because you have that appraisal of the situation doesn't mean that it actually is. And so I want to just normalize that too. Like, it is everyone who does exposures and everyone who's like relinquishing and getting rid of a ritual in whatever form, they all feel like that's unsafe. They all feel like that's not healthy. They all feel like that's like anti everything that they think that should be done.
That's what's so hard about exposure is we naturally want to protect ourselves. So doing ERP is not going to feel natural.
Right, exactly. Like, it's going to go against what you think. And so again, I would ask yourself, knowing what I have come to know about exposure and response prevention, what's good for my treatment? And so I'm also hearing, I see Compassionate Soul in the comments saying some people say that they're necessary, so I'm confused which to stop. Don't even ask. Again, like, that seems that could be compulsive too. Just be ask yourself a couple of these questions. Like, one, do I feel like I urgently need to do this? Like Jackie said earlier, urgency is a really big red flag that this is obsessive compulsive, that this is rooted in fear. Urgency is not necessarily, there aren't a lot of things that I need to do that are urgent, right? Like, I maybe want to do them, or I prefer to do them, or I'd like to do them that way. But like, if the world came crashing down and like things happened or my plans changed, like, very rarely is it urgent, like urgent. If something is urgent, red sign. That's like a check mark in the OCD box. Yeah. Ask yourself, how would I feel if I didn't do this thing? Would you feel scared? Would you feel anxious? Would you feel not right? Would you feel like a bad person? Would you feel uncomfortable? Would you feel worry and uncertain? Another check in the OCD box.
Yeah.
And, is this getting in the way of your values at the end of the day? Like, is one thing that I do love, I learned from the happiness trap, and this is taken from ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. The best practical advice that I could give to you is, instead of evaluating like whether you should do it or shouldn't do it, ask yourself, is this helpful? Is this helpful? Like, instead of evaluating all of your behaviors on like, should I do this or should I not? Is this safe or is this not? Other people said that I should do this. Other people said, but these crazy chicks online are saying that I shouldn't, or whatever. Like, end all of that. Is this helpful? Is the way that I'm living my life, is that helpful?
And is it helpful long-term or short-term? Because if it's temporary, then it's not helpful because it's just going to keep coming back.
Yeah. And again, that's another, like, one of my go-tos, like Jackie said, doing what's helpful for you, not for the next 5 minutes, but for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
For the next 50 years, right? And so sometimes those decisions are like, what helps you 5 years from now or 50 years from now is what doesn't seem helpful right now. And so I would encourage you to ask yourself what's helpful, and even more so, like, what's helpful, not just in the next 5 minutes, but in the next 5 years. And I think that will probably give you some clarity above and beyond asking people what they do, above and beyond asking people what's normal. So my encouragement is to resist trying to do those things and try to ask yourself what's helpful and what's going to be helpful in the long term. Other things that you could do just practically, if you're not able to resist something completely, try just reducing it. So maybe if you can reduce all of the rituals that you're doing by half, just start there, and there you get half of your day back. right? So even if you take away 25% of your rituals there, you get a quarter of your day back. So you don't always have to do this all or nothing. You don't always have to just get rid of everything. Just take small steps. Like Atomic Habits is another really great book. That's like an analogy that he goes over in that book. It's all about how small consistent change adds up to really big, significant changes over time. It's about like if you have a plane going, I'm not going to get this right, but like from California to New York, and you make that plane go like a centimeter off from starting in California to New York, it ends up in like Hawaii or like Florida. Florida would be the one. Like it's just a centimeter for a huge plane, but because it's a centimeter that whole entire time, it ends up in a completely different direction. So my advice is asking yourself what's helpful, asking yourself what's helpful in the long term, not just right now, and then trying to just reduce those things, make some small changes that you can be consistent with over time. Jackie, that was so fun.
So fast.
That did. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I wish we could answer all of your questions. Obviously, I know you're going to do this again, so hopefully
you can come back with me anytime. Anytime, you guys. Yeah. So we have had a lot of people say that, you know, we are awesome. Way to go. Someone is really digging my glasses. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, so you guys are awesome. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to more questions, but we have to hop off. So I'll be back every Monday. Jackie, I would love to have you back at some point. We have lives for the rest of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Yeah, and I'll be back every Monday. I'm going to take over Mondays from now on. So I'll see you guys next Monday. Jackie, thank you so much. Let's wrap up. I want to have everybody know where they can find more of you.
Yes, so the easiest way to find me is probably on my Instagram, which is at Jackie Shapen Therapy. My website is also jackieshapentherapy.com, and that's where you can find me. Yeah, just look me up there. And Jenna follows me, so you can find me through Jenna. Cool. And in Los Angeles, so anyone in California that needs some help, just reach out to me. And I'd love to come back anytime.
Yeah, this was super fun. Oh my gosh, it's just a fun chat. So yeah, you guys, again, my name is Jenna. I'm over at jenna.overbaugh on Instagram, so you can find me there. You can find me every Monday here, and we will definitely have Jackie back. Thank you guys so much, and thank you one last time to Jackie. Bye, guys.
Bye.